All right, chapter 3, picture perfect. We're going to talk about photography. Why we're talking about photography in the context of Airbnb, because they are counterintuitive. So here we are.
And they were designed
And they were designed, yes.
background. So
All right. Last chapter, we talked about Y Combinator. So now they were not yet in Y Combinator. They're now in Y Combinator. So they are still not a successful company. It's still very much this bootstrap, scrappy startup, but they now have some infrastructure around them. They have some wisdom. They have some capital invested. There's some like a little bit of a vote of confidence that they can make this thing work. So they're in Y Combinator. We're going to start here. Y Combinator, founded in 2005 by Paul Graham and 3 co-partners. It's very quickly and still today is one of the most prestigious launch pads in Silicon Valley, called, quote, a quasi-startup factory, university, and venture capital fund rolled into one. So this is the world that they've now been given the opportunity to exist in because they are cockroaches. So I think this is important. Paul Graham ends up having a pretty formative influence on the 3 co-founders and plays a pretty vital role in setting the direction for them from how they think about business in a principles perspective. So Y Combinator famously has a motto. That motto is, it says, make something people want.
yes,
It's simple, it's 4 words, and it should be common sense. But when you think about how most businesses run, it's actually pretty counterintuitive. I feel like most businesses make something with a cost structure that's as low as possible. They make something that is as flashy as possible. Like they almost do everything they can, but skip over the part of like, do people actually want this? And so I just love this like core principle of, hey, Airbnb comes in and they are drilled, it's drilled into their heads over and over and over again. Make something people want.
related to that, there's a little thing we talked a lot about during my time at Chick-fil-A, which was producer logic versus consumer logic. And we naturally go to producer logic. That's kind of like the right on page. It's like, what's easiest for us? What's better? What do we think? It's all about us. But consumer logic looks at it from the other perspective. What do people want? And I think it's easy to get trapped in developing what we want them to have versus what they want. And so, that whole Y Combinator effect. The other thing is you're in Silicon Valley, you're in the middle of technology, and, in many ways that could send you in the wrong direction in terms of something as human, so to speak, as Airbnb. But I think the producer logic versus consumer logic, you always have to balance those two. And we tend to be out of balance on producer logic because just human nature is to think this is the way I would want to do it, or this would make it easier for me, versus getting on the other side of the counter and viewing it through the customer's lens.
All right, let me ask you this question, and you just answered it, but I'm going to reframe it and see and let you answer it again. So you look at some of those successful companies in the world, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, he has used the phrase customer obsessed. Interviews with the media, we are customer obsessed. We're customer obsessed. There's a great book called Invent and Wander, which brings together all of his annual letters. You read all of them, 20 plus years of them. We are customer obsessed. We are customer obsessed. Airbnb, therefore, is customer obsessed. They start with the user in mind and work backwards. Apple, Steve Jobs has a famous quote. We start with the consumer and work backwards to the technology, not with the technology and work backwards to the consumer. So if the greatest companies in the world think this way, why do so many go the opposite way and backwards?
Yeah, it's not human nature to think that way. Well, I think we're basically born selfish. I didn't have to teach my kids, to be selfish.
Yes.
We never had. I had to teach them to be generous. I had to teach them to, care about others. So I think we're just wired to be that way, and then we have to overcome that along the way.
And a great way to overcome it is to have somebody like Paul Graham telling you over and over again to make something people want.
There was another little quote that surfaced about the same time during the Airbnb story, and that was, I'd rather have 100 people that love what I do than 1 million who are just okay with it. You may have the exact.
We're gonna hit there. This is
okay.
No, this is a perfect segue.
All right.
So very early on, Paul Graham taught them 2 important lessons. First, he asked them how many users they had, and they told him not many at all, only 100. If that, they said. He told them not to worry, that it's much, much better, this is what you were just saying, to have 100 users who love you than 1 million users who sort of like you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that again. So it says, don't worry if you only have a couple of 100 users. It's much better to have 100 users who love you than 1 million users who sort of like you. It's a tenet that flies in the face of conventional Silicon Valley wisdom, which prioritizes scale and growth above all else. But it sank in and it gave them hope. Next, he asked them about these users. Where were they exactly? The founders told them they were mainly in New York City. Remember, they're in Silicon Valley right now. Their users are mainly in New York City. Graham paused, then repeated back to them what they had just told him. So you're in Mountain View and your users are in New York? He asked. They looked at each other, then back at him. Yeah, they said. What are you still doing here? Graham said to them. Go to New York. Go to your users. So to their users, they went for the next 3 months. Jebbia and Chesky flew to New York every single weekend. They went door to door, trudging through the snow and meeting or bunking with every single user they could. They learned a lot from talking to their customers. Man, how few people talk to customers. But they learned more by simply parking themselves in their living rooms and observing them as they used their product online. They quickly identified 2 pain points. People had trouble pricing their properties, number 1. And number 2, to the chapter title, they had trouble with photos. Photos are a huge problem area. Users didn't take very good ones, and back in 2009, many people still didn't know how to upload them properly. As a result, homes that looked inviting in person looked tired and dingy on the site. So they decided to offer to send professional photographers to each host's home at no charge. I think that's a counterintuitive decision that we'll hit. But they had no money, so Chesky borrowed a camera from a friend and did it himself, often knocking on the door as the photographer to the same hosts he visited the day before as the CEO. I mean, think about how counterintuitive that is. I feel like that's your DNA all over it. I feel like this is, like, if you had lived in a different life, like this would have been you knocking on doors in New York City as one day CEO, next day photographer.
That is classic. Yeah, one of the things that reminded me of while you were telling that story is, I remember years ago, I had the great fortune to have breakfast with the 2 founders of Home Depot. And it was a fascinating opportunity. But one of the things that they told me that blew my mind, and again, it's very counterintuitive, and it just didn't seem even possible. They were telling, and this was when they were still the founders, they're still involved with the business, they're still growing the business, Bernie Marcus, Arthur Blank, and they said they spend 80% of their time in their stores. And, I'm still relatively low but there was no way I could spend 80% of my time. It's like I got too many meetings to go to, too much paperwork to go through, all this kind of stuff. I said, how in the world do you do that? Here's what they told me. They said, when we spend 80% of our time in the stores, when we get back to the office, all the decisions become obvious. They don't need all the paperwork and they don't need all the data. And, it's like the people that are customer facing know what's going on. And when they're around those people, and what they said is what they realized was going on before they were spending that much time in the stores is everything that got to them would come through 8 people who would each sanitize it just a little bit more. All the numbers and the data and the stories, by the time they got it, it was way too sanitized and way too confusing. And it like created this fog between them and the business. But when they could get upfront and personal in the business, and I just love it. They said, when we got back to the office, all the things we needed to do and all the answers were really obvious after spending that much time in the field. And I've never forgotten that, nor the fact that even at that stage, I didn't see how I could do that, much less the 2 guys running the company free up enough time to do that. But I think it's a good lesson for all of us that customer face, the people closest to the work are usually the ones that are the world's greatest expert on the work.
We have, you and I both know Trevor Woodward, an
Yeah.
incredible teammate here at Addo, brilliant strategist, like a really analytical, data-driven mind. And I love, because it's counterintuitive, as a data nerd, a self-proclaimed data nerd, he would say that he is. And I've heard him in meetings say this to clients, and he stole this from Jeff Bezos for like the full credit to the credit. It's when the data and the anecdote disagree, trust the anecdote. And this is coming from a person who lives in data and is I couldn't believe more in the power of data. Like data is an incredible tool. We need it. We need more of it. But when the data and the anecdote disagree, trust the anecdote. Again, I think Jeff Bezos is the source of that quote. But it's speaking of what you say, like you get the right anecdote when you're spending the actual time, Home Depot in stores, Airbnb in hosts' homes, to get the powerful anecdote that will help inform and maybe filter the data that you're seeing in the meetings.
Building on that idea, I remember, the next part of the story is they realized that the platform wasn't as much the problem, the content was, the pictures were. So they started putting some of these pictures onto their same platform, but all of a sudden the ones with the new pictures started renting so much faster than the rest that convinced them. So the anecdote convinced them with data to make the bigger decision, but they started with the anecdote.
Yes.
And then the data comes as a result.
And how about, so I love, it would have been so easy for them to say, there needs to be better photos on the site.
Yeah.
We can provide photography.
Yeah.
This can be a revenue making service for us. We will facilitate, we'll pull in maybe local photographers. We'll take a cut of each payment.
Yeah.
We'll still pay for it. This will be great. It's a win-win-win. Like, and it probably would have been a win-win-win.
Yes.
But the counterintuitive decision to say, no, we're going to provide this free of charge. And it goes back to, if your mindset is having 100 people who love you, you give it to them for free. If your mindset is 1 million people who kind of like you, you make them pay for it. And in the first cause, 100 people who love you, you have people who, when times get hard, won't leave you and they'll rave about you and tell other people. When you have 1 million people who kind of like you, the moment things get tough, there's something they don't like that happens on the site, a competitor comes along and offers something of similar value, the sort of like you people flee.
Right.
The loyal people stay. And these are the decisions that it's painful not to capture the revenue in the short term, but is probably a huge reason why Airbnb kind of reached the viability point, if you will.
Just building on that idea too, I often think about a brand as the degree of emotional connection.
The best definition of a brand.
To their brand. Yeah, it's my favorite definition. But when they made that decision, we're going to come do the photographs, you're going to see the result in your business. They're making deposits in the emotional bank account of those people. And once you've made a lot of deposits, you can afford to make a withdrawal down the road. But if you said, we're just going to sell you something else, no deposit, and then therefore no withdrawal down the road. So I think that's another aspect of most of the greatest brands. Think in terms of deposits, and they think long-term in terms of not short-term wins, long-term wins, not short-term.
And it comes from a posture of generosity.
Yes. A couple thoughts that went through my mind as kind of some principles coming out. I counterintuitively and kind of, I think sometimes to get big, you've got to act small. We tend to want to act big, like do these massive things, but actually you got to start small. We used to say, if we'll get better, customers will demand we get bigger. And it's about focusing on the small things. Start small to get big. Another aspect of it was, before you can solve for 1 million people, you got to solve it for one. And I'm reminded of how we used to roll out new products at Chick-fil-A. We would spend hours and hours vetting, hundreds of products, get it down to 1 or 2 that we were actually thinking about rolling out after going through 100. But those 1 or 2, we'd start with 1 location, and we'd make 90% of our mistakes in the 1 location with the operator who is willing, to take that burden and willing to give us that kind of air of grace and umbrella of grace, so to speak. And so we could get 90% of the problems out of the way with just 1 location. Then we would expand it to 3 to 5 locations. And we could probably knock off another 5 or 7% of the problems, but we would never expand something nationally initially. It's like we would do one location, 5 to 7 locations, then 3 markets, then roll it out nationally. Again, start small, in order to get big.
It takes patience to be able to do that as
Very
well.
much
Most
so.
people just, let's make a decision, let's roll out to scale right away.
You got to be thinking long term.
Yep.
Again, it's a long term proposition. We want to be successful in the long term because we got to live in the long term.
Yeah. What did you talk about? Short term consequence, long term gain.
Yeah. Yep.
And all right, on to the next chapter.
Let's do it.